Culture is an ecosystem that houses the defining elements that characterize society. Every culture is a unique incubator of dreams, speculations, representations, and misgivings about life that merge into a filter through which human beings experience a simulation of the world. The persuasions from those that live through the filter may seem novel, strange, or even unsettling from another culture's vantage, but what they all have in common is that they succeed in structuring our interpretations about life, all the way down from seemingly mundane topics, right up to the big questions about the natural world and what kind of future we envision for ourselves. Western culture is a curious case. For all its appeals to universality, it has a remarkably insular outlook, because despite its interior sentiment that persuades us to think of all peoples as more or less the same, no one in the world thinks the same as we do. We have our own ways of interpreting history. We have distinctive opinions on defining what art is and how certain styles should be presented. It shouldn't go without saying that we have remarkably different ways of conceiving what the human world should look like compared with other nations. And also, we have our own homegrown notions about what nature is and what human beings are like that distinguishes us from the rest of the human family. We could almost think of the West as being like a remote island, isolated from the rest of the world, and whose inhabitants are enclosed within an artificially constructed environment that both sustains their activities and exerts certain influences upon them. And whilst it's fair to say that we could consider all societies this way, the West stands out in that its own extraordinary developments in only the last 400 years have resulted in the formation of an entirely different perspective that has restructured our way of interpreting life and how we interact with complexity. And despite being serenaded from within the walls of the Citadel as the most sophisticated way to interpret life, it, like any other filter, has blind spots, and that naturally means that the shortcomings of the filter become our own shortcomings. Despite the tendency of entrenched perspectives to place restraints on our understanding, this has not gone amiss to many members of our cultural group, from philosophers to scientists to artists, who have attempted to examine, interpret, critique, and speculate upon the nature of our contemporary arrangement. Even popular media, an enthusiastic advertiser of cultural biases, has played its own role in presenting to us fragments of the filter, shall we say, so that we can experience a new awareness of our arrangement from inside the simulation of our culture. Jurassic Park is a worthy example of this. Many have encountered this through the movie adaptation of the earlier fictional work by Michael Crichton, and was released to much fanfare in the early 90s for its groundbreaking special effects and intriguing premise. Yet beneath the seemingly innocent entertainment lay a poignant warning about the follies of our modern outlook. Because despite being remembered as a tale about humans and dinosaurs, Jurassic Park should properly be regarded as a techno-thriller, because in reality, it's a meditation on how we devise artificial systems to meet with and manipulate nature, and how it's so easy to forget that no matter how well thought out a technological system is, or how many contingency plans we put in place, there is always a wider dynamic to life's arrangement. With all of the splendour of a Greek tragedy, Crichton's tale unravels through a series of devastating events, what befalls us when we mistake the map for the landscape, and how just because something works in the abstract of our minds doesn't mean it will translate into the chaos of the world. And so to start this off, I think most people watching this will already have seen the movie or at least read the book, so we'll have a pretty decent idea about the way that things turn out. But before we go on to talk about the events in greater depth, I think it's worth contextualising what Jurassic Park is as a system per se. On one level, we could say that Jurassic Park is the manifestation of one man's vision. This man in the narrative is John Hammond, a billionaire who has harnessed the power of cutting-edge biotech to resurrect animals from the remote past. He plans to systemize and commercialize this innovation into a business model in the shape of a theme park. He is a true visionary, with all of the energy, tenacity, and single-mindedness that comes along with that. Then we might look at the park as a byproduct of the modern techno-scientific worldview. This had its beginnings in the times of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, and fosters a persuasion pertinent to our interpretation of the park. Namely, that nature is completely understandable and exploitable through the application of instrumental reason. This also follows into the commercial outlook. Nature is purely a world of things. Things are potential resources. Resources can be exploited and incorporated into commercial models for the generation of profit and the expansion of commercial networks. This outlook is the most important one to consider in our assessment because, in one way or another, it structures the mentality of every major player who has had a hand in designing the park. And then finally, from the point of view of the dinosaurs perhaps, we might say that the park embodies an unfamiliar and ambiguous power, a power that exerts influence on their behaviour, on their natural cycles of feeding and reproduction, and their overall experience of the world as they receive it. It's certainly not the same arrangement that their ancestors were adapted for. Now that we've mapped out the underlying issues that we're facing, I'd like us to explore more of the individual characters' motives and how their differing perspectives on the park rub against each other. We've already mentioned the park's visionary agent, John Hammond. The irony of a man like Hammond is that he is caged within a dream he cannot escape from. He is as much of a prisoner of this dream as the dinosaurs he is imprisoned inside their electric paddocks. He is clearly intelligent enough to understand complex affairs on some level, yet he never wants to go the extra mile and understand things at their own level, because such an openness to variability might interfere with the integrity of his vision. To a man like Hammond, vision is all. It is his world in a sense, and everything has to coordinate around that vision in order to be deemed acceptable or unacceptable to him. John Hammond has many pressures, both from within the park and from the outside world. The park's infrastructure is not quite ready, and there are many authoritative bodies and investors placing pressure on him to get the park open on deadline. Also, recent reports of an attack by an unspecified reptile on a nearby island are threatening the project with closure. However, one thing that Hammond does have in abundance is money, and being a man of near limitless resources, this forces him to consult from several specialised fields whose respected commendation he hopes will guarantee the security of his vision. These specialists range from fields as diverse as paleontology, botany and mathematics, and the one I really want to focus on is the latter type in the way of a character named Ian Malcolm, played by the actor Jeff Goldblum in the film. In the fiction, Ian Malcolm stands as a kind of trickster contrarian, who is consistently pointing out the inconsistencies in both Hammond's vision and the overconfidence his engineers place in the power of their technocratic models to be able to coordinate and control organic life, much to the chagrin of both. Malcolm's reservations about the project derive from his field. He is operating from what was then in the 90s a new breed of mathematics called chaos theory. The practitioners of chaos theory differentiated themselves from conventional mathematics in the sense that they were prone to using computers in their work, a practice frowned upon by some of their more traditional colleagues. They were also more interested in how various systems in the real world worked, especially in complex phenomena that resulted in so-called non-linear equations, such as weather patterns or the dynamics of water, for example. It won't serve us to go into a detailed exposé of what chaos entails here, save to say that Ian Malcolm is coming at the park from a completely different perspective than anyone else. Because due to his positioning as a chaos theorist, Ian Malcolm has a sensitivity for non-linear relationships and a tolerance for unpredictability, spontaneity, and randomness that neither the single-minded vision of John Hammond nor his technocratic priesthood possess. The Malcolm character actually reminds me of a real-world thinker in the shape of Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Much like the character of Malcolm, he spent many years of his life interested in how the precise nature of systems work, independently of our persuasions to control them, which has gifted his intelligence with an appreciation of non-linear complexity and interacting relationships that many others underestimate. Taleb worked for many years as a trader on the stock market, which he says released him into financial independence. He used his spare time to become something of a contrarian theorist and author, yielding books dealing with his concepts like the black swan effect and antifragility. In fact, the reason why I brought up Taleb is because his concept of antifragility is highly relevant to the fictional setting of Jurassic Park. In essence, antifragility derives from the observation that certain systems benefit and grow stronger from factors which we have been led to believe would destroy them, such as stress, volatility, randomness, disorder, risk, and uncertainty. Examples of this would be the way that organic bodies and economies work. Both benefit from a healthy measure of stress, variance, and randomness, and any efforts to make these systems predictable and malleable to systematic control will ultimately end in failure. As Taleb states, much of our modern structured world has been harming us with top-down policies and contraptions which do precisely this, an insult to the anti-fragility of systems. This is the tragedy of modernity, as with neurotically overprotective parents, whose trying to help are hurting us the most. Taleb argues that systems which satisfy their inherent anti-fragility outperform and outlast systems that are excessively trying to micromanage the potentiality for equivalent stresses and randomness out of them. The unfortunate result of this is they end up installing too many contingencies, making the system weaker through excess regulation, not more resilient to damage. This is what Taleb calls touristification. It is in the systematic removal of uncertainty and randomness from things, trying to make matters highly predictable in their smallest details, all of that for the sake of comfort, convenience, and efficiency. Touristification castrates systems and organisms by sucking randomness out of them, whilst providing them with the illusion of benefit. Both the engineers of Jurassic Park and John Hammond need their creations to work like predictable clockwork for the maintenance of their artificial systems, the organisms housed inside them, and the success of their commercial enterprise. But due to the consequences of their approach to this project, and their refusal to comprehend the criticisms levied at them, the system inevitably breaks down. I said at the beginning of this assessment that Jurassic Park should properly be regarded as a techno-thriller. The best parts of the novel, in my opinion, are the many conversations held over the ethics of biotechnology and mankind's attempt to cordon and commercialise nature. This brings us back to the chaos mathematician Ian Malcolm and what he has to say about the techno-scientific worldview that facilitated the abomination of Jurassic Park. You create new life forms about which you know nothing at all. Your Dr. Wu does not even know the names of the things he has created. He cannot be bothered with such details as what the thing is called, let alone what it is. You create many of them in a very short time. You never learn anything about them, yet you expect them to do your bidding because you made them and therefore you think you own them. You forget that they are alive, that they have an intelligence of their own, and that they may not do your bidding. And you forget how little you know about them, how incompetent you are to do the things you so frivolously call simple. All of this exposes a problem at the heart of how we think about life, especially so in the developed world. The naive, optimistic notion that we can structurally map out all of reality according to how our intellectual graces see fit. We will generate models of models, and then models of the models, which we will then mistake for the precise nature of the phenomena that we were attending to. Now, these models might be consistent with certain elements of truth in the world, but unless we retract from our attachment to them and attempt to understand complex phenomena, not just as things out there in the world, not just as utilitarian resources or instruments for our command, but as a complex melange of processes, patterns, and relationships, then we will never obtain a mature appreciation of life that men like Nassim Taleb insists is essential for a comprehension of how complex systems actually work in the real world. In fact, Taleb has his own name for the types of people who would make the assertion that we can fit reality into neat brackets, and that we can govern life according to a schematic. He calls them fragilistas. The fragilista falls for the delusion, the unscientific overestimation of the reach of scientific knowledge. Because of such delusion, he is what is called a naive rationalist, a rationalizer, or sometimes just a rationalist, in the sense that he believes that the reasons behind things are automatically accessible to him. This property of natural things not to advertise themselves in a user's manual is, alas, not much of a hindrance. Some fragilistas will get together to write the user's manual themselves, thanks to their definition of science. This highlights the popular stance that can be heard in every boardroom and TED stage in the developed world, that all systems are ultimately predictable, and should be expertly managed by tight regulation to mitigate, if not outright negate, factors such as randomness and risk. The world is received like a giant machine, and we are its self-elected management. It is a contrived, alienated stance that betrays a deeper understanding of how complex systems work in their real dynamism and diversity. Yet it is nonetheless a stance that carries a great weight behind it, and it is a surprisingly easy one to fall for if we don't have a wider scope for how things work. It is a testament to Michael Crichton's ability to translate the effect of a character's mentality into the reader. When you listen to the park's engineers talk about how they overcame all of the obstacles to create the animals, to all of the contingencies that they mapped into their biological architecture to work with the cycles of how the park would run, to the security, to the AI computer intelligence that runs throughout the whole machinery of the park, to practically everything that you can think of, they thought about it. And they had 50 meetings about it. And then they had 50 more meetings about the meetings. And it all just sounds so logical, so meticulous in all of its execution, and so stupendous in its vision that you want to believe that it could work. It really speaks to that Promethean sentiment that we find at the center of all humanism, that we can do this, that we can truly figure out this world. And when we stand in awe before the impressive statures of our mega telescopes and these great hadron colliders that hurl particles together at unimaginable speeds, doesn't it overwhelm you into believing, in almost a quasi-religious way, in the indomitable power of human reason and technological supremacy over mute nature. And even though somebody like myself would say that it's futile to believe that, there's a reality inside there, because within the Promethean core, that's a strong part of what's got us where we are today. But like everything we find in life, it's a double-edged sword, because whilst there is a part of it that empowers us and enables us and awards insight to our minds, there's another aspect to it that inhibits us, that misguides us, and blinds us to the wider nature of these patterns and movements around us. And the problem for humans is, what effect does this technological power do to our development? And if the authoritative mindset that wields this power, this technocratic, hyper-rationalistic mindset, if this has holes in it, shortcomings, blind spots, deficiencies in the program, so to speak, then won't those naturally carry over into the life systems around us? Is our world in a more conscientious, more reasonable state of affairs now we have a legion of fragilista experts advising us all on how to live? Are our societies safer and better managed thanks to a top-down regulation approach? Are we seriously, and I ask this from a genuine place, are we any more enlightened as an intelligent species compared to people in the past, simply on the metric that we have better technology to show for it? And if we're seeing a greater attachment to those technologies, especially in the age we're in now, in the age of smart devices and VR, then what kind of world are we going to find ourselves in one day? And what happens when the deficiencies in our engineering of this new world begin to show us unforeseen events, black swans, or black dinosaurs in this case? I predict the revelation will hit us like a ton of bricks, just like it does for the characters in the fictional setting of Jurassic Park, and we'll ask the same questions we always hear whenever unexpected random events come out of the blue to knock the wind out of our rational sails. How could all this happen? Mistakes were made, lessons have been learned, independent inquiries set up, more regulation and protocol applied. Never will we question whether our fundamental assessment of life needs to be adjusted, because we believe in the machine too much. And most of all, we're addicted to the arrogant notion that we've settled into since the Enlightenment, that we can control it, and that it's not controlling us. Ian Malcolm has an interesting take on scientific power that I want to share with you as we draw this thing to a close. You know what's wrong with scientific power? It's a form of inherited wealth. Most kinds of power require a substantial sacrifice by whoever wants the power. There's an apprenticeship, a discipline lasting for many years. Whatever kind of power you want, president of the company, black belt in karate, spiritual guru, whatever it is that you seek, you have to put in the time, the practice, the effort. You must give up a lot to get it. It has to be very important to you, and once you've attained it, it's your power. It can't be given away. It resides in you. It is literally the result of your discipline. Now, what's interesting about this process is that by the time that somebody has acquired the ability to kill with his bare hands, he's also matured to the point where he won't use it unwisely. So that kind of power has a built-in control, with the discipline of getting the power changes you so that you won't abuse it. But scientific power, is like inherited wealth, attained without discipline. You read what others have done and you take the next step. You can do it very young and make progress very fast. There is no discipline lasting many decades. There is no mastery. There is no humility before nature. There's only a get-rich-quick, make-a-name-for-yourself-fast philosophy. Cheat, lie, falsify, it doesn't matter. Not to you or your colleagues. No one will criticize you. No one has any standards. They're all trying to do the same thing. To do something big, and do it fast. And because you can stand on the shoulders of giants, you can accomplish something quickly. You don't even know exactly what you've done, but already you've reported it, patented it, and sold it. And the buyer will have even less discipline than you. The buyer simply purchases the power like any commodity. The buyer doesn't even conceive that any discipline might be necessary. A karate master does not kill people with his bare hands. He does not lose his temper and kill his wife. The person who kills is the person who has no discipline, no restraint, and who has purchased his power in the form of a Saturday night special. And that is the kind of power that science fosters and permits. And that's why you think to build a place like this is simple. John Hammond's vision succeeded in restoring prehistoric life from extinction, only to then place said life into an entirely different arrangement than the one that they had been adapted for, all perpetuated by a fragile web of ambition, greed, and the hubris that arose from the notion that the corporate technocratic vision that achieved it all was in control of its own creations. We're all encouraged by the overreaching confidence we place in our all-too-human specialists to forge a way through the chaos, to convert the ambiguous into a certainty, and through the enlightened talents of their expertise, to be able to fashion perfectly orderly, logical, and efficient systems where the disorderly stickiness of our organic arrangement will become tamed like an obedient pet, and integrate into this world that reason dreamt. And maybe there are still those of us who share a dose of Ian Malcolm's skepticism in the tenability of those dreams, and the folly of our confidence to be able to map emergent life into predictable programs.